He's just an orderly. Stay out of this.
Then let him operate. My daughter's life is in his hands.
Doctor, her heart is failing.
David Carter stepped out of his apartment. The building was crumbling, walls cracked, paint peeling away. The air smelled of damp concrete and rusted pipes. He carried a white coat over his shoulder. It was no longer white. The fabric had faded to yellow, the cuffs frayed, the seams thinning. It looked tired, just like the man who wore it. David was tall, broad at the shoulders, yet his posture bent slightly forward. Years of carrying more than weight, years of carrying memories. His face was lean, sharp lines cut by time, a scar curved near his temple. His eyes were steady, dark and unreadable. There was no fire in them now, only quiet calculation. Once these hands had saved lives on battlefields. Once his name had carried respect. Now, those same hands pushed carts of linens, carried water, wiped down tables. From battlefield surgeon to hospital orderly, that was his fall. In the corridors, colleagues barely looked at him. Some smirked. Some whispered loud enough for him to hear. He was something once. Not anymore. Don't let him touch a patient. David said nothing. Silence was safer. Silence protected him. Yet, when a patient dropped a blanket, he bent, lifted it gently, tucked it back under frail arms. His fingers were calm, practiced, careful. The gesture of a true doctor, hidden inside a man stripped of the title. At night, the streets outside his window filled with shouts, gunfire, the grind of tires. He sat alone in his chair, blinds half closed, listening. Memories returned with the noise, the rattle of guns, the cries of the wounded, the iron smell of blood. He remembered too clearly. And still, what haunted him most was not the death he could not stop, but the lives he could have saved, if only he had been allowed. Then came the accident. Sirens tore through the morning calm. Ambulances lined the hospital entrance. Nurses rushed, voices overlapping. Doctors gathered in the trauma bay. A stretcher burst. Through the sliding doors, on it lay a young woman, the chairwoman of a billion-dollar company. Everyone knew her face from screens and magazines. Powerful, untouchable, until this moment. Her white dress, once immaculate, once dazzling, was torn, drenched in blood. Red streaks ran across her face, slipping down her cheek, dripping onto the silk fabric. Yet even then, there was beauty. Her skin was pale but smooth. Her lips trembled with each breath. Her hair, loosened, fell across the stretcher in dark waves, and behind the closed lids, you could almost imagine her eyes clear, sharp, alive. The contrast was haunting. Blood and elegance, fragility and power, life dangling on a thread. Doctors swarmed around her. Orders barked, machines beeped, scalpels. Prepared. David stood at the edge of the room, was a shadow with a tray of instruments. No. One asked his opinion. No one would have cared, but his eyes were fixed. He saw details others missed. The rhythm of the monitor, the uneven breaths, the subtle signs of something deeper than trauma. A voice inside him screamed. The diagnosis was wrong. If they continued this way, she would not last an hour. He clenched his jaw. If he spoke, they would laugh. If he objected, they would silence him. To them, he was no more than an orderly in a worn coat. Yet, the truth pressed harder with every beep of the monitor. He had lived through chaos before. He had pulled soldiers from the edge of death with nothing but a flashlight. Knew what he was seeing, the young woman on the table, bleeding, trembling. yet still radiant, was about to slip away, and David Carter, the man nobody trusted, now faced a choice: stay silent or step forward. The trauma bay was tense, bright, unrelenting. Doctors moved quickly, convinced of their path. The young woman's chest rose weakly, her breath shallow, blood streaking down the torn silk of her dress. David stood in the corner, silent no longer. His words had already cut through the noise. "Check again. Run the test," the surgeon sneered. "You waste our time." The scan was clear. A ripple of laughter spread. Residents shook their heads. Nurses whispered behind their masks. The sound stung. Sharp as glass, a janitor pretending to be a doctor. What a joke. The father stepped forward. His voice was calm but commanding. "Do it again, now." Reluctant hands moved. The machines whirred. Monitors glowed. The new scan began. Seconds dragged like hours. The results blinked onto the screen. Normal. The surgeon spread his arms with smug finality. "You see? Nothing. Just as I said." The room erupted in laughter this time. Louder, harsher, crueler. One resident leaned close to David, his voice dripping with scorn. "Back to mopping floors." David's jaw tightened, but he did not flinch. He knew what he saw. The truth was still hidden, buried under human error. Then the door burst open. A nurse rushed in, breathless, pale, clutching a folder. Her voice cracked. "Wait!" The result: there was a mistake. The test was mislabeled. The room froze. She held up the corrected report with trembling hands. And there it was, undeniable. Severe cardiac abnormality. The orderly had been right. The surgeon's face drained of color. The laughter died instantly. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The father turned, eyes blazing. He stepped closer to David. "This man saw what you did not. My daughter breathes because of him." Then, with a voice that shook the room, "Let him perform the surgery." Shock rippled across the staff. "Impossible!" the surgeon snapped. "He has no license. He's an orderly. He cannot be trusted." The father's stare cut them down. "You will trust him, or answer to me," whispers spread. The hospital board was alerted. Within minutes, men and women in suits appeared at the edge of the room, summoned by power and fear. They huddled, spoke in hurried tones, gestured toward David. "He's dangerous. He treated criminals once. He lost his credentials." Yet when they pulled his old files, their voices faltered. Military records, commendations, accounts of battlefield miracles under impossible conditions. A surgeon who had saved dozens with nothing but rags and firelight. Man broken not by failure but by politics, by enemies with deep pockets. Reluctantly, they yielded. Their voices dropped. "Very well, but under supervision. The liability will be ours," the father cut in coldly. "No, the liability is mine. If she lives, it is because of him. If she dies, it is on me. He will operate." The words struck like thunder. No one dared to answer. Eyes turned slowly to the man in the frayed white coat. The man they had mocked, laughed at, dismissed. David Carter. He stood still, his breath measured, his eyes fixed on the patient. He did not bask in vindication. He did not smile at their shame. All he felt was the weight of her life pressing against his chest. He had been given a chance, now he had to prove worthy. The team prepared. The room for surgery, hands trembled where they should have been steady. No one laughed. Now, the monitors beeped with urgency, pulling everyone into the gravity of the moment. David moved to the sink, washing his hands with deliberate care. Water rushed over scarred knuckles, over hands that had once sewn arteries in tents lit by lanterns. He raised his eyes to the glass, met his own reflection. This was no battlefield. This was no jungle. But it was war all the same, and he had been called to fight. Behind him, the father watched in silence. Behind him, the board exchanged nervous glances, and behind him, the young woman lay pale and beautiful, streaked in blood but unbroken, waiting for the man the world had discarded. The instruments gleamed under the lights. David approached the table. For the first time in years, The room was his. The laughter was gone. The jeers were gone. Only the test of truth remained. Do you believe an orderly could become a savior? The operating theater filled with the sound of preparation. Metal trays rattled, masks snapped into place. Gloved hands hovered, hesitant, uncertain. Everyone's eyes followed David Carter, the man in the frayed white coat, the man they had mocked. Now he stood at the head of the table, scrubbed, gowned, ready. The patient lay motionless, her skin pale, her lips trembling faintly with each breath. Blood still stained the silk of her dress. Though most had been cut away for access, the contrast was sharp. Wealth, beauty, and fragility exposed under sterile light. David's hands hovered above her chest. They did not shake. The battlefield had taught him discipline. Noise, chaos, even death. None of it reached him now. He saw only the line of incision. "The hidden danger beneath," a surgeon muttered from the corner, his voice dripping with doubt. "This is madness," another whispered. "If she dies, it will ruin us all." The board members stood behind the glass, lips pressed tight, unwilling to meet each other's eyes. David ignored them. He focused on the monitors. The rhythm of her failing heart. He spoke clearly, calmly. "Scalpel." The nurse hesitated, then obeyed. The blade rested in his hand, familiar, almost natural, as if it had been waiting all these years to return. He pressed lightly, the line precise. Deliberate, blood-welled, but controlled. Expected, his voice remained steady. Suction, retractors, clamp. The team followed, though doubt lingered in their movements. Every gesture from David carried confidence born not of textbooks, but of survival. He had cut flesh under mortar fire. He had sutured arteries by flashlight. Now in this theater with full equipment, he was unstoppable. The monitors beeped faster. The patient's rhythm faltered. A nurse's voice cracked. "She's crashing!" Gasps spread through the room. One board member stepped back, whispering, "Shut it down!" Another hissed, "He's killing her!" But David did not flinch. His eyes narrowed. His hands moved faster. Controlled. Adrenaline. Now, the injection hit. For a heartbeat. Nothing. Then the rhythm flickered. Faint, but present. Her body fought to stay alive. David leaned closer, sweat beading on his brow, his voice low. "She's not gone." "Hold steady." Memories flashed in his mind. Soldiers pale as ash, gasping in dust, clinging to life with threads of breath. He had seen this before. He had pulled men back from the brink, and he would do it again. Clamp tighter. Retract further. His orders came sharp, precise. The team followed now without question. The nurse's trembling slowed. Even the skeptical surgeon leaned in, watching closely, caught in the gravity of his command. At last, the source revealed itself. A tear, small but lethal, hidden where scans had blurred. It pulsed with each heartbeat, threatening to burst completely. "There," David whispered. He guided the clamp, steadied the field, prepared his suture. His hands moved with a craftsman's grace, thread and needle dancing as if time itself had slowed. The wound closed, the monitor steadied. Her pulse grew stronger. The room exhaled as one. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, slowly, eyes turned toward David. No one laughed now. No one whispered. What they had witnessed was not luck. It was mastery. Behind the glass, the father pressed his hand against the window, his eyes wet but unyielding. "Save her," he mouthed. David nodded once, never breaking rhythm. The operation was far from over, but the tide had turned. The mockery was gone. Only respect, silent, reluctant but undeniable, remained. Sometimes the one they cast aside is the only one who can lead them through the storm. The operation stretched into its most dangerous hour. Sweat ran beneath masks. Gloves grew slick. Every second weighed like a stone. David stood unmoving, at the center, his posture straight, his eyes locked on the open chest before him. The young woman's heart beat faintly, stubbornly, but the damage was deeper than expected. A rupture hid itself in a vessel branching close to the chamber wall. Delicate. Lethal. The skeptical surgeon muttered again. It can't be repaired. Too close, another added. If he touches it, she won't survive, but David did not answer. He remembered soldiers with shrapnel buried against arteries. He remembered nights when one wrong stitch meant death. He had no luxury of surrender then, and he had none now. He inhaled slowly, raised his voice. Prepare bypass. We need to still the heart. Gasps echoed. To stop the heart entirely was a last resort. Risk beyond measure. The board members behind the glass shook their heads in horror. The father, however, pressed forward, palm against the window. His lips formed two words. Do it. David nodded. Bypass ready. Lower temperature. Clamp. The monitors shifted. The beating slowed, then paused. The room fell silent, as if the world itself held its breath. The patient's heart lay still in David's hands. Fragile, small, yet the very seat of power that ruled her empire outside these walls. Time thinned. Each second could be the last. David worked quickly. Needle and thread passed with precision, mending the vessel, reinforcing the wall. Every movement was measured, deliberate. Not a tremor betrayed him. A nurse whispered, unable to contain awe. It's like he's painting. The others dared not speak, afraid to disturb the impossible. Then, a slip. Blood surged. The clamp wavered. The monitors shrieked. Pressure dropping! Bleeding out! Panic threatened the room. Hands trembled. A tray clattered to the floor. But David's voice cut through the storm. Sharp as steel. Hold steady. Suction. More light. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. His memory reached back to the battlefield, to a boy no older than 20, torn open by fire. That boy had lived because David had refused to let go. He would not let go now. Thread slid, clamp tightened, bleeding slowed. The vessel held. Now. Warm her. Restart flow. The bypass machine released. Blood surged back. For a breathless instant, nothing. Flat lines glowed across the monitor. Then, a pulse. Weak, then stronger. Beep, beep, beep. The room erupted with gasps of relief. One nurse covered her face. Another whispered, "She's back." David exhaled slowly, lowering his hands. The heart beat steady once more. Fragile, but alive. The worst had passed. Behind the glass, the father bowed his head, lips trembling in silent prayer. The board members exchanged glances. Pale and shaken, they had doubted, ridiculed, resisted. Yet the proof now throbbed on the monitor in steady rhythm. The skeptical surgeon finally spoke, his voice low, reluctant. "I would not have dared, but you were right." David did not answer. He was too tired, too focused on closing carefully, ensuring nothing undone would return to haunt her life. He moved as if still carrying the battlefield on his shoulders. Knowing that saving one life was never the end, it was only the beginning of a longer war. At last, the wound was closed. The monitors steadied. The patient lay secure. Her beauty no less radiant for the scars that would remain, even with blood dried against her cheek. Even with stitches hidden beneath the skin, she seemed untouchable, like someone marked not for ruin, but for destiny. The team stepped back, breathless, some with shame, some with awe. No one laughed now, not one. David stripped off his gloves, his hands raw and trembling beneath. He looked once more at the patient, then at the father waiting. Beyond the glass, a simple nod passed between them, an unspoken bond forged in crisis. The operation was over, but the story was only beginning. They mocked him, they dismissed him, yet in the end, the one they cast aside was the one who held her life in his hands. Do you believe an orderly could become a savior? The night outside the hospital was silent, heavy with rain. Inside, the operating theater slowly emptied. Nurses whispered as they wheeled away instruments, their glances drifting toward the man who had done the impossible. David Carter stood alone at the sink. Washing blood from his hands, the water ran red, circling the drain before disappearing. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, a man older than his years, lines carved deep by war, by loss, by exile. His shoulders were broad but bent, carrying weight unseen. The scars on his knuckles told stories no one here wished to hear. He turned, drying his hands on a towel that had seen better days. The father of the young woman was waiting by the door. His suit was soaked, his eyes red, yet his presence carried the gravity of command. "You saved her," he said simply. No flourish, no ceremony, just truth. David inclined his head. "I only did what had to be done." The father stepped closer, his voice low. "They mocked you. They doubted you. But I saw the steadiness in your eyes. I trusted you because I recognized it. A man who has faced death before does not tremble when others do." David said nothing. Memories flickered. Dusty battlefields, screams in foreign tongues, the smell of iron and smoke. He had faced death too many times to count, and yet here, in this sterile room, the ghosts followed him still. Behind them, a group of board members shuffled nervously. Their polished shoes squeaked on the tile. One cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, the matter of tonight must remain confidential. You understand the legal implications. An orderly performing surgery is—" The father cut him off with a glare sharp enough to silence a room. "Do not speak of legality when this man has given my daughter back her life. You—" He jabbed a finger toward the trembling suits. "We're ready to let her die under your negligence. He saved her. He will be honored for it." The board members exchanged frantic glances. One whispered, "If this reaches the press," another hissed, "We cannot let his name be tied to us." David remained silent, drying his hands slowly, listening. He knew this dance too well. When the poor succeed, the powerful rewrite the story. When the forgotten triumph, the world pretends it never happened. The father, however, would not bend. His voice rose, echoing against the cold walls. "You will not erase him."
"If you bury this, I will bury you." The silence that followed was absolute. The suits backed away,
Pale and shaken, for now they yielded. But resentment burned behind their eyes. A soft voice broke the moment. She's waking." All turned to see the young woman being wheeled from recovery. Her eyes fluttered. Weak but alive, her chest rising steady beneath the blanket. She was pale, her lips chapped, yet beauty clung to her like armor. Blood had been washed from her face, leaving skin luminous under the dim lights. Her hair, though tangled, framed her features like dark silk. Even in fragility, she radiated presence, an empress wounded but unbroken. David watched her pass, his expression unreadable. He felt no triumph, only a quiet relief that the gamble had not claimed her life. The father reached for his daughter's hand, his voice trembling with gratitude. "You're safe now." Her eyes drifted, unfocused, then found David. For a moment, confusion passed over her features. Then, recognition, faint but certain. Her lips parted, forming a single word, almost inaudible. "Why?" David hesitated, then answered softly, "Because you deserved a chance." The stretcher rolled on, disappearing down the hall. The echo of her question lingered in the air. "Why?" Behind him, whispers resumed, some with admiration, others with resentment. But David knew better than to stay. He gathered his worn coat, folded it over his arm, and walked toward the shadows of the corridor. The father called after him, his voice resolute. "This is not the end, Mr. Carter. Tonight was only the beginning." David paused, his back to them, then walked on without a word. The rain tapped against the windows as he vanished into the dark. One life had been saved, but the cost of truth is never small. What happens when a miracle threatens the pride of the powerful? Morning light filtered through the blinds of the private recovery room. The rain had passed, Leaving the city washed clean, but inside the hospital, the air was still heavy with what had happened the night before. The young woman lay against white pillows, an IV line in her arm, her chest rising and falling with new strength. Her hair had been brushed, falling softly around her face, though the bandages at her side told the truth of her fragility. Even now, she seemed untouchable, her beauty sharpened, not diminished, by the ordeal. She was no longer the chairwoman who commanded boardrooms. She was simply human, breathing, alive. At her bedside sat her father, watching her with fierce devotion. He had not left since the operation ended. When her eyes opened, he leaned closer, whispering, "You are safe, rest." But her gaze moved past him. Searching the room, she remembered fragments, faces above her, the sting of pain, the sound of laughter, and one figure standing firm against it all, the man they mocked, the man who would not step aside. "Where is he?" she whispered. Her father frowned, uncertain. "Who?" "The one who saved me." Before he could answer, the door opened quietly. David stepped inside, carrying a tray of supplies. No coat of authority, no air of triumph, just the quiet humility of an orderly, returning to his duties as if nothing had changed. The father rose, his expression caught between pride and worry. "Daughter, this is David Carter." Her eyes fixed on him. He looked older in daylight. His frame was solid but worn, his face marked by years of hardship. His hair, once thick, had thinned, threaded with gray. His eyes, deep, unyielding, held the weight of too many nights without sleep. Hands scarred, skin roughened, yet steady as stone. Every line of him told a story of survival. "You," she said softly, her voice both fragile and steady. "You wouldn't let me die." David lowered his gaze, uneasy under her eyes. "I only did what had to be done." The father spoke with force. What had to be done was what no one else dared. "You owe your life to him." But the young woman shook her head faintly. "No, I owe my life to his courage, to his refusal to be silenced." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "And for that, I thank you." David shifted, uncomfortable. Gratitude weighed heavier on him than scorn. He nodded once, almost curtly. "You are strong. You will recover." The board members entered then, summoned to the room, though unwelcome. Their polished shoes gleamed, but their faces were pale. One spoke, carefully measured. "Miss, we are relieved at your survival. However, last night's unorthodox procedure must remain undisclosed. For the reputation of this institution," the father's eyes blazed. "You dare!" But his daughter raised a hand. Her voice was quiet, but it carried authority. "Unorthodox? No. Necessary. If you had listened to him sooner, there would have been no delay. If you bury this truth, you bury me." The words silenced the room. Her father's lips curved in a grim smile. Spoken like a true leader, the board members retreated, defeated but not resigned. Their glances at David carried both fear and hatred. He had humiliated them by proving what they had refused to see. When the room cleared, only the three remained: father, daughter, savior. The silence stretched until she broke it. "David Carter, why do you serve as an orderly? A man with hands like yours should not be pushing carts in hallways." His eyes flickered, shadows moving across them. "I was a doctor once. War took that from me. Men with power ensured I would never hold a license again." Her gaze did not waver. Then they wasted a gift. "I will not." The father leaned forward, his voice heavy with meaning. "My daughter speaks truth. The world will know your name again, and if they resist, I will break them." David said nothing. He had walked too long in shadows to believe in promises of redemption, but for the first time in years, a flicker of something stirred within him. Not triumph, not pride, hope. He bowed his head, silent. The young woman reached for his scarred hand. Her touch was light, warm against the cold calluses, and in that moment, An unspoken bond was forged. One life saved is never only one life. It is the beginning of a chain, and chains, once set in motion, cannot be stopped. The news spread like fire, though no one admitted to striking the match. Whispers slipped through hallways, into waiting rooms, across the city's boardrooms. A young chairwoman had nearly died, and it was not the hospital's finest surgeon who saved her life, but an orderly. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was suffocating. Doctors avoided David's gaze, some out of shame, others out of bitterness. Nurses looked at him with quiet respect. Though none dared speak it aloud, the board seethed behind closed doors, desperate to contain what could not be contained. David moved through it all like a ghost. He carried trays, cleaned instruments, mopped blood from floors, duties unworthy of his hands, yet duties he performed without complaint. But everywhere he went, silence followed. Every step reminded them of the night they had been wrong, and he had been right. Meanwhile, in her recovery room, the young woman grew stronger each day. The color returned to her cheeks, the light to her eyes. She still bore pain, but it no longer defined her. Instead, she bore questions about the man who had saved her, and why he remained in the shadows. One morning, she summoned him. He arrived with the same quiet humility. His coat frayed, his posture wary. She gestured for the others to leave, until only they remained. "Tell me," she said softly, "why do you hide who you are?" David did not answer at once. He looked at her, at the strength beneath her fragility, and then away again. "I was once a doctor, a surgeon. War stripped that from me. Mistakes, politics, made certain it would never return. So I work where I am allowed." Her eyes did not waver. "You saved my life when no one else could. Do you expect me to accept that you belong in shadows?" David's jaw tightened. "I expect nothing. I survive. That is all." She leaned forward, her gaze fierce. "No, survival is not enough. Not for you. Not for me. If I let them bury what you did, then I betray myself. And if you keep hiding, you betray the gift you still carry." The words struck deeper than she knew. David remembered nights in makeshift tents, stitching flesh by lantern light, swearing to dying men that their pain had meaning. But when the war ended, the world discarded him as if none of it mattered. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice raw. "Why do you care?" Her lips curved faintly. "Because I am alive. Because I looked into your eyes when you held my heart in your hands, and I saw no fear. I will not let that be forgotten." For the first time, David could not meet her gaze. He bowed his head silent, torn between gratitude and dread. That afternoon, her father called a meeting. Board members, doctors, investors, all summoned into one room. David was dragged there as well, though he stood at the edge, his coat threadbare among polished suits. The father's voice was thunder. "My daughter lives because of this man. You mocked him. You resisted him, and still he prevailed. From this day, his name will be spoken with respect." The board erupted. "This is unacceptable. He is not licensed. If the press uncovers this, we are ruined." The father silenced them with a glare. "Better ruined than damned by truth. Do you think the world will forgive your arrogance if this comes to light? You will honor him, or I will ensure your career's end tonight." The room fell into bitter silence. None dared answer, but their hatred burned hotter for being caged. David stood apart, his face unreadable. He did not crave honor, nor vengeance, yet he knew the tide had shifted. Whether he wished it or not, the world would no longer allow him to remain invisible. That evening, as he left the hospital, the first flashbulbs of reporters struck his eyes. Questions rained down. "Is it true an orderly performed surgery? Who are you really, Mr. Carter? Why did the board hide your past?" David pushed through the storm, his silence unbroken. But deep inside, he felt the old chains beginning to crack. When truth escapes its cage, it cannot be hidden again. And sometimes, the man who wants no spotlight becomes the very man the world cannot stop watching. The storm broke 3 days later. Front pages across the city carried the same headline. Orderly saves billion-dollar chairwoman. Cameras swarmed the hospital gates. News anchors debated his name, his past, his silence. Some called him a hero. Others called him reckless. But all agreed. He was no ordinary orderly. Inside, the board panicked. Their attempts at denial collapsed under the weight of evidence. Nurses whispered to reporters, patients repeated rumors, and the father himself confirmed the truth. David Carter had performed the surgery. David Carter had saved his daughter. Yet David walked the corridors unchanged. He still carried trays, still swept floors, still endured the sideways looks of doctors who once mocked him. The world outside shouted his name. But inside these walls, he remained a ghost. One evening, as the cameras flashed beyond the windows, she asked to see him again. The young chairwoman sat upright now, strength returning with every breath. Her gown could not hide her elegance. Her eyes burned with new resolve. When David entered, she dismissed the nurses. Her voice was soft, but her gaze unyielding. They speak of you everywhere. Some worship you, some fear you. But you... She studied him. You walk as if nothing has changed. David set down the tray, his hands rough against polished steel. Because nothing has changed. I am still what I was yesterday. Her lips curved faintly. No, yesterday you were unseen. Today you cannot hide. The world has seen you, and so have I. Silence hung between them. She searched his face, the scars. The lines, the eyes heavy with battles fought long ago. There was no vanity in him. No hunger for recognition, only weariness. And something deeper. An ache for meaning. You were a doctor, she pressed. He nodded once. A surgeon. I learned in chaos, in places where blood ran faster than time. When the war ended, I returned with my hands still steady but my name broken. They stripped me of my license, of my place. So I became what you see. Her voice dropped. Yet you are more than what they see, and I will not let them bury you again. David's gaze lifted, wary. Why? You owe me nothing. She shook her head. I owe you everything. My life, my future. And perhaps more than that. The words lingered. Delicate yet daring. David's chest tightened, though he masked it behind silence. He had buried his heart years ago. With the soldiers he could not save, but something in her eyes threatened to unearth it. That night, outside her room, the corridors buzzed with unrest. Doctors whispered of betrayal, of a man who had humiliated them. The board convened in secret, their anger boiling. His presence is a liability, one snapped. If we allow him to rise, he will overshadow us all, another hissed. They plotted, even as the world outside crowned him a savior. Jealousy is a sharper knife than truth. The next morning, she walked the corridor for the first time, her father steadying her arm. Cameras captured her every step. But when she stopped beside David, resting a hand on his sleeve, the flashbulbs exploded brighter than before. She looked at him not as a patient looks at her rescuer, but as an equal, one marked by trust. Reporters shouted questions. Miss, is this man truly your savior? She answered simply, her voice clear. Yes, without him, I would not stand here today. The nation heard. The world listened, and David Carter's shadowed life was dragged into the light. That evening, she sought him once more. They stood by the window overlooking the city. Lights glittered below like a sea of restless eyes. They will not leave you alone now, she said. Every step, every breath, they will watch. David's reply was quiet. Then let them watch. I have nothing left to hide. She turned, studying him in the dim glow. Nothing to hide, perhaps, but something still to claim. You saved my life. Now I intend to save yours, David frowned. What do you mean? Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something fiercer. I mean this. You will not remain a ghost. You will walk beside me, not behind. If they resist, we will resist harder. If they threaten, we will stand taller. Because survival is not enough, David Carter. Not for you, not for me. The The words struck him like a blade turned kind. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of chains loosening, not by his own hand, but by another's faith. He saved her life. Now she would fight to return his, and together they would challenge a world built to bury men like him. This story has only just begun. If you believe that justice can still be found in the shadows, subscribe now so you won't miss what comes next. Because the next chapter will leave you breathless. The world did not agree on David Carter. To some, he was a miracle worker. To others, a fraud who had broken the rules of medicine. News channels replayed. The night again and again. The moment an unknown orderly stepped into chaos and left with victory. Hashtags spread across social media. The orderly, surgeon, savior or risk arguments, flared in comment threads, in offices, even around dinner tables. On one side, voices rose in awe. This man should be reinstated immediately. He's proof that brilliance can't be buried. He deserves a second chance. On the other side, fury boiled. He risked a billionaire's daughter on a gamble. If he failed, the hospital would be ruined. No license. No right. The board seized the anger like a weapon. They leaked stories of David's past. Stories colored with shadows, whispers of failed missions, of decisions that cost lives on foreign soil. They wanted him painted not as a savior, but as a danger. And yet, the image of him bent over the chairwoman's broken body, steady and unshaken, would not vanish. People could not look away. Inside the hospital, the storm was louder still. Reporters pushed at the doors. Families of patients asked for David by name. Young interns followed him with wide eyes, whispering that they wanted to learn from him. David himself remained unchanged in appearance. His coat was still frayed, his shoes still worn, but something in his bearing had shifted. Not arrogance, not pride. Something quieter, like a man who had been invisible, now forced to walk in the light. The young chairwoman saw it clearly. From her window, she watched the chaos outside, then turned her gaze inward. The walls of her room were lined with flowers, letters, gifts, but none of them mattered more than the man who came quietly each day, asking if she was well. One evening, she asked him to sit. The machines hummed softly. Her father had just left the room, his presence like thunder fading down the hall. She studied David's face, the tired eyes, the lines carved deep by wars fought in silence. "You hear them out there?" she said. "They are shouting for you. Some love you. Some hate you. But no one ignores you anymore." David's voice was low. "Attention is not always a blessing. And yet," she countered, "you bear it with silence. Why?" His answer came slowly. "Because I have carried silence longer than I can remember. When I was stripped of my license, I said nothing. When they sent me to clean floors, I said nothing. Even when they laughed as I warned them of your condition, I said nothing. Words rarely save lives. Hands do." Her eyes softened. "But it was not only your hands that saved me. It was your voice, the courage to insist, even when they mocked you. That is what I owe my life to." David looked away, his chest tight. No one had spoken to him this way in years, not since the battlefield. When men bled into the dust and whispered their last thanks, the chairwoman's hand, still pale, reached across the blanket. Her fingers brushed his. "Let them rage. Let them argue. But you and I, we know the truth. And the truth is stronger than their noise." For a long moment, David said nothing. But in the silence, his hand did not pull away. Outside the room, her father stood in the corridor, listening. He had seen many men stand tall in boardrooms, but few stand tall in chaos. David Carter had done both, and though the board plotted against him, the father knew what he wanted. A man like David beside his daughter. The days ahead promised war. The media would not rest. The board would not forgive, and David himself would not find peace. But inside that quiet hospital room, a seed had been planted. Respect, gratitude. Something deeper still, something neither dared to name. The world was divided, but in the eye of the storm, two souls found a fragile bond, and sometimes it is the bond that decides the battle, not the storm. The board struck back, not with scalpel or suture, but with words sharp enough to cut a man to pieces. They called a press conference. Flashes erupted as the chairman of the board stepped to the podium, his polished smile cold. "We regret the chaos of recent days," he began. An orderly acted beyond his station. "While the outcome was fortunate, the violation of protocol cannot be excused." Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters shouted questions. "Are you denying he saved her life? Is this hospital punishing its own hero?" The chairman's smile never wavered. "This institution is built on discipline, on rules. Without them, lives are endangered. If we reward insubordination, we invite disaster." Within hours, headlines shifted. Not savior, not hero, but unlicensed, dangerous, rogue. The smear spread like infection. Old files surfaced, cases from David's battlefield years, photographs of broken tents, burning convoys, men screaming in dust. Every tragedy was laid at his feet. Every scar was painted as failure. For the first time since the surgery, David felt the weight of chains return, not iron, but shame. He had carried these memories alone for years, and now they were dragged into daylight for strangers to dissect. That night, he sat alone in the hospital's dim cafeteria, a cold cup of coffee, a tray untouched. The laughter of doctors at the far end, mocking in whispers. But then, a shadow fell across the table. Her. The young chairwoman sat opposite him, elegant even in her hospital gown. Her eyes blazed with anger, but not at him. "At first, I thought survival was enough," she said softly. "But now I see, survival without truth is just another kind of death." David raised his gaze, weary. "They are powerful. They can erase me with a signature." "Then let them try," she snapped. "You saved me. That cannot be erased, and I will not let them write a lie where the truth belongs." Her words struck like thunder. In that moment, David realized he was not alone in the storm. The next day, she summoned the press. Cameras crowded her room, the glow of lights painting her pale face. She stood, fragile but unbroken, with her father beside her. "I am alive today," she declared, her voice steady, "because of David Carter. Not because of a board, not because of a protocol. Because one man saw the truth when others refused. The board raged behind closed doors, but the public heard only her words. They saw the fire in her eyes, the scar on her chest, the defiance in her stance, and they believed. Still, the hospital doubled down. They issued warnings, threatened suspension. One director sneered, "If he sets foot in an operating room again, we'll call the police." The word spread quickly. Soon, David could feel the walls closing in. Every corridor echoed with judgment. Every glance cut deep. Yet outside those walls, crowds began to gather. They held signs. "Let him heal. Justice for David." A doctor in all but name. It was no longer just his fight. It had become a movement. Late one evening, as the protests swelled beyond the hospital gates, David stood at the window of an empty ward. He looked down at the sea of faces, strangers chanting his name, hope and fear tangled in his chest. A voice broke the silence. Her voice. She had come. Leaning on the doorframe, her presence steady. "They will not stop," she said. "Not until you stand. Not until you choose." David turned slowly. "Choose what?" "To remain silent, or to claim who you are." The air thickened. For years, he had hidden in silence. Now, a choice loomed: speak and risk everything, or stay silent and lose more than himself. A storm of lies, a chorus of truth, and one man standing at the crossroads. What he chose next would decide not only his fate, but hers, and perhaps the fate of them both. David Carter did not sleep. The night stretched endless. lit only by the faint glow of monitors and the echo of voices that would not leave his mind. Unlicensed. Dangerous. Rogue. The words of the board circled like vultures. Yet outside, the chant still rose. Justice for David! Let him heal. The sound seeped through the hospital walls, defiant against silence. At dawn, David walked the corridors with quiet steps. He still wore the same faded scrubs, still pushed the same cart. But today, something in his stride was different. Purpose had taken root. He passed. Doctors who turned their eyes away. Nurses whispered behind masks. But David did not stop until he reached the conference hall, the one place he had no right to be. Inside, the board gathered, a table of polished wood. Men and women in tailored suits, their voices sharp, cutting through the air. The protests are damaging our reputation. We must terminate him officially before this escalates. David opened the door. The room froze. You have no place here, the chairman barked. Return to your duties. David's voice was steady, low. For years, I obeyed. I carried silence as if it were a burden carved into my chest. But silence nearly killed her. It will kill others too. No more. Murmurs erupted. One director hissed, "This is insubordination of the highest order." David stepped closer, eyes dark but clear. "You hide behind rules while people bleed. You buried my past because it frightened you. Yes, I was a battlefield surgeon. I made choices that haunt me, but every scar on my hands is a life I fought to save. And when your doctors failed, it was those same hands that saved your chairwoman." Gasps. Some faces turned pale, others hardened with rage. The chairman's smile faltered. "You expect us to reinstate you with a speech?" "I expect nothing from you," David replied, "but I will not let you erase the truth. From this moment, I will speak it. If you try to silence me, you will have to do it in the open, before every camera, every patient, every family that now knows my name." The room trembled under the weight of his words. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then, laughter, brittle and forced. "You think the public will sustain you? Crowds fade, headlines die. When they forget, you will be nothing again." David's answer was quiet but sharp. "They will not forget. Not because of me, because of her." At that moment, the door opened again. The young chairwoman entered. Her father by her side, every eye turned. She wore no gown now, but a tailored suit, her scar visible above the collar. Instead of weakness, it made her stronger. She stood at David's side without hesitation. "My life," she said clearly, "belongs to this man. If you destroy him—" "You destroy me!" The board erupted in chaos, shouts, protests, furious gestures. But the cameras outside the glass caught it all. Journalists pressed against the windows, microphones raised, recording every word. The chairman realized too late. Their fortress was no longer sealed. The world was listening. David did not gloat. He simply stood, shoulders squared, the storm finally behind his eyes. For the first time in years, he had spoken as himself. Not an orderly, not a shadow, but a surgeon. When the meeting broke, chaos spilled into the halls. Reporters swarmed, some hailed him, others tried to corner him with questions about his past. David gave no speeches. He offered only one sentence: "I will heal whoever stands before me, until the day I no longer can." That night, back in the quiet of an empty ward, he sat by the window. The chairwoman joined him, her presence calm after the storm. "You made your choice," she said. "Yes," David replied. "And now?" He looked out at the city lights. "They will come harder, with more lies, with more threats. But I will not step back again. If they want war, they will have it." A man once silenced had spoken. The battle lines were drawn, and the war for truth had only begun. The hospital no longer felt like a place of healing. It was a battlefield of whispers, headlines, and eyes that followed David Carter wherever he went. Every corridor echoed with tension. The board's smear campaign had failed to silence him, but it had not stopped them. Instead, they sharpened their knives. Anonymous leaks began to appear in the press. Stories of failed battlefield operations twisted into accusations. Doctor of Death, one tabloid headline read. Social media exploded, half the world praising him as a hero, the other half branding him reckless. His face was everywhere, yet the man himself felt lonelier than ever. Late one evening, as he left the ward, a car slowed outside the hospital. The tinted window rolled down. A voice called his name. David turned, cautious, but the car sped off, leaving only the echo of laughter in the night. It was a warning. The board was not acting alone anymore. There were hands outside these walls that wanted him gone. The next morning, the chairwoman summoned him. She stood by the window of her private suite, sunlight pouring across her face, casting fire into her eyes. Her voice was calm, but the tremor beneath it betrayed urgency. They are escalating. This is no longer just politics inside these halls. My family has enemies who see opportunity in your rise. If they can discredit you, they weaken me as well. David's jaw tightened. So I've become their weapon. No, she said firmly. You've become their fear, and that is why they will try harder. Silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Finally, she stepped closer, her hand brushing his scarred knuckles. Do not let them drive you back into silence. They tried once. You cannot give them victory again. Later that day, chaos erupted in the emergency wing. A bus accident flooded the hospital with patients. Bloodied children, broken bones, shattered cries filled every room. Doctors scrambled. Nurses ran. Amid the storm, one patient collapsed with a failing heart. The surgeon on duty hesitated, unsure. Time slipped like sand. David stepped forward. His hands moved with certainty born from war. He ordered instruments, barked instructions, and for a moment the chaos bent to his will. The patient stabilized. Life clung where death had already reached. Around him, eyes widened in recognition. Again, the man they called an imposter had done what others could not. But triumph was short-lived. A board member appeared, fury burning through his voice. You had no authorization. You will be reported. Do you understand what you've done? David removed his gloves slowly, his voice steady. I saved him. That is what I did. The confrontation spilled into headlines by evening. Cameras swarmed. Protesters cheered. Opponents hissed. The hospital board gathered again, now under siege from all sides. Some demanded David's arrest. Others feared public backlash if they touched him. The institution was fracturing, and everyone knew it. That night, David walked alone through the empty streets beyond the hospital. Rain fell, slicking the pavement, soaking through his thin scrubs. He remembered the battlefields, mud, blood, smoke. He remembered the silence after explosions, the faces he could not save. And he remembered why he had chosen silence when he came here. Because silence had felt safer than being hunted. Now there was no safe place left. As he reached the corner, another car slowed beside him. This time it did not speed away. The door opened. Two men stepped out, their suits dark, their eyes colder still. You should leave this city, one said. His voice was calm, almost polite. Disappear before someone ensures you do. David stood unmoving in the rain. His heartbeat was steady. He had seen men like this before, in war zones where truth was buried with bullets. He knew their type. But something inside him had changed. He no longer belonged to silence. If you want me gone, David said, his voice low, then you'll have to bury the truth with me. And truth does not die so easily. The men exchanged glances. Then, without another word, they stepped back into their car and vanished into the night. When David returned to the hospital, the chairwoman was waiting in the lobby. Her eyes searched his face, reading what he would not say. Without speaking, she placed her hand on his arm. A silent vow passed between them. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. The world outside was changing, tilting toward chaos. The hospital was no longer just a place of medicine. It had become the stage for a battle of power, lies, and survival. David Carter, once invisible, was now the center of it all. And the war against him had only begun. The city awoke divided. Across television screens, David Carter's face dominated every channel. Morning anchors debated him like he was a trial unfolding in real time. One voice called him a miracle worker. Another spat the words, reckless imposter. Headlines screamed from the newsstands, hero or fraud? Outside the hospital, the crowd swelled. Students with handmade banners, veterans holding faded medals, mothers clutching the hands of children he had saved during the bus crash. Their voices rose in unison, "Let him heal! Justice for David!" Yet across the street, another group gathered. Paid protesters, perhaps. Their chants were venomous, fraud, criminal. Signs accused him of murder, of lies, of blood that never washed clean. Police stood in a tense line between the two camps, sirens flashing like a warning of the storm to come. Inside the hospital, the board huddled in secret. Their walls once felt like fortresses, but every whisper now leaked into the world outside. One director slammed his fist against the table. "If we don't end him now, he will end us. The public must see him as poison." Another leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Then we dig deeper. We release the sealed records. Every battlefield operation. Every failure. Let them choke on his past." They did not know the chairwoman was listening. She stood hidden in the corridor, her body still healing, but her spirit sharpened like steel. When she heard their plan, she knew the board had crossed a line. By evening, the attack came. News outlets aired grainy footage from overseas. A war zone, chaos, bodies carried under smoke. They framed David as a butcher disguised as a surgeon. They showed soldiers screaming, twisting the narrative into accusations that his decisions had cost lives, not saved them. The effect was immediate. The city roared with outrage. Hashtags spread like fire. David the Butcher alongside David the Savior. The streets boiled with arguments, neighbors shouting at neighbors, friends unfollowing friends. David was no longer just a man. He was a battlefield all over again. David watched the broadcast in silence. His shoulders slumped, not from guilt. He knew what had truly happened in those sands overseas, but from the weight of watching his past twisted into weapons. He heard voices of men he had failed to save, the echoes of battlefield cries that never left his ears. For a moment, he felt the old pull of silence, the desire to vanish again. But then the chairwoman entered. She turned off the screen with a single decisive motion. "They think this will destroy you," she said. "It might," David replied quietly. "No," she answered. "It will reveal you. Because now you must choose whether to hide or to fight." He looked at her, searching her scarred but unbroken face. "And if I fight, then I fight beside you," she said without hesitation. The next day, David walked out of the hospital doors. Cameras exploded with flashes. Reporters shouted. The crowd surged forward. For the first time, he did not bow his head. He raised it. "I was a battlefield surgeon," he said, voice carrying over the noise. "I made choices where no choice was clean. I saved lives. I lost lives. That is the truth. And today I will not hide from it. If you believe I am a fraud, you may shout. If you believe I am a healer, you may stand with me. But I will not be silent again." The crowd erupted, half roared with anger, half with cheers. The police strained to keep them apart. That night, the chairwoman's father visited David. His presence was imposing, a man accustomed to command. He studied David in silence, then finally spoke. "They will come harder now. The board, the families they serve, the ones who profit from your silence. They fear you because you answer to no master. That makes you dangerous." David's reply was calm. "I am dangerous only to those who would bury the truth." The old man's eyes glinted with a mixture of respect and warning. "Then be ready, because truth has a price, and those who fear it will make sure you pay." Outside, the city burned with voices. Inside, alliances tightened. David Carter had stepped into the light fully, and now there was no turning back. The storm had broken. The real war was here. Night draped the city in uneasy silence, but the hospital never slept. Police sirens pulsed outside as though the building itself had a heartbeat. David Carter sat alone in the dim cafeteria, untouched coffee cooling in front of him. He could still hear the echoes of the crowd, half hailing him as a savior, half damning him as a fraud. The door opened. A nurse slipped in, pale and trembling. "They said I shouldn't warn you," she whispered. "But you need to know. There's talk. The board isn't stopping at words anymore." David's eyes lifted, steady but weary. "What kind of talk?" She hesitated. Talk of shutting you down permanently, and not through courts. Before he could press her, the intercom blared. A trauma alert. Multiple victims inbound. A car accident on the freeway? David rose instantly, instincts overriding fear. Minutes later, chaos flooded the emergency bay. Patients streamed in, groaning, bloodied. Doctors rushed from bed to bed. Amid the storm, a boy no older than 12 lay motionless, chest caved from impact. David's training took over. He seized the surgical kit, called for suction, barked orders. The staff hesitated but obeyed. His hands moved with speed and precision, and after tense minutes, the boy gasped, fragile breath pulling life back into his body. Relief surged, then shattered. As David pulled off his gloves, a loud crash echoed through the bay. 2 masked men stormed in, weapons drawn. Panic erupted. Nurses screamed. Patients wailed. One of the men pointed straight at David. "You don't belong here," he snarled. But before they could advance, security charged in. Chaos spun into fists, shouts, and alarms. The men fled into the night, leaving fear clawing at every wall. The hospital shook with outrage. Reporters swarmed, hungry for blood. Some accused David of staging the attack to look like a martyr. Others whispered of darker forces moving in shadows. For the first time, even seasoned staff felt the danger pressing in. Later, the chairwoman confronted him in her suite. She wore a silk robe, pale against her healing skin, but her eyes blazed with fury. "They came for you inside these walls," she said. "Do you see now? This is not just politics. This is war." David's voice was low, steady. "I've seen war before, but not like this. Here, the battlefield is truth itself." Her father entered then, leaning on his cane, his presence commanding. "You saved my daughter, and tonight you saved a boy. But understand, your enemies are not only within this hospital. They stretch across the city. They profit from silence, from fear, from burying men like you." David met his gaze. "Then I will not be buried. Not again." The old man studied him, then nodded once as if weighing steel and finding it true. "So be it. But know this, when men like you rise, they either become legends or casualties." The next morning, the board convened in fury. Cameras leaked footage of the masked intruders. Questions raged. Who had sent them? Why was hospital security so slow? Behind closed doors, directors shouted. Some demanded David's removal. Others feared the backlash of touching him. Divisions split them wider than ever. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, candles flickered in vigil. Citizens gathered through the night, some holding signs of thanks, others chanting for his arrest. The city had become a mirror of David himself, fractured, burning, alive. In the quiet hours before dawn, David stood at the window of the chairwoman's suite. The skyline glowed faint under clouds. She joined him, her shoulder brushing his. Neither spoke at first. Then she said softly, "They tried to take you tonight." "They will try again." David's answer was almost a whisper. "Let them. Every time they strike, they show the world who they truly are. And every time I stand, I show the world who I am." Her hand found his, tentative but firm. "Then stand, and I will stand with you." Outside, the first light of morning broke, but it did not bring peace. It revealed a city on edge, a world holding its breath. David Carter had survived the first true attempt to silence him. But the war had only sharpened, and the next strike would come harder. The city no longer argued in whispers. It roared. By dawn, the front steps of the hospital looked like a siege ground. Barricades split the crowds. On one side, candles and hymns, citizens calling David a guardian angel. On the other, megaphones and smoke bombs, voices demanding he be jailed before he killed again. Police strained to keep order, but the lines blurred. The city was no longer debating a man. It was choosing a side in a war of truth. David Carter walked past it all, shoulders straight, eyes forward. His presence silenced some, enraged others. Cameras tracked his every step. In their lenses, he saw the reflection of his past chasing him, battlefields, broken oaths, the scar of silence he had once accepted. Not anymore. Inside the boardroom, panic reigned. The masked attack had failed to remove him, and the footage leaking onto national broadcasts only fueled suspicion that the board itself had been complicit. Their fortress of power was cracking, but rather than retreat, they doubled down. "He cannot be allowed to speak freely," one director hissed. "If he does, he exposes everything. The contracts, the experiments, the bodies we buried under policy." Across the city, a different storm brewed. In a quiet cafe lit by the pale glow of laptops, investigative journalists sifted through files slipped anonymously into their inboxes. The documents traced a line from the hospital board to offshore accounts, secret surgical programs, and whispers of organ trafficking across borders. At the center of it all, the same network now trying to bury David. That evening, David received a message. A slip of paper slid under his door. 6 words only. "They killed before. They will again." The warning rang in his mind as he walked into the chairwoman's suite. She stood near the window, her dress simple but her posture regal. Her father lingered in the corner, cane tapping lightly against the marble. They had both seen the city turn into a powder keg. "They want you destroyed," her father said bluntly. "Not discredited, destroyed." David's jaw tightened. "Then we show them why they fear me." The chairwoman stepped closer, her voice low, urgent. "There are files, David. Files that prove everything. Not just about you, about them. About the trade they have hidden for years." His eyes narrowed. "And you have them?" She shook her head. "No, but I know where they are kept. Across the ocean. In Shanghai. If we expose them, they cannot bury you. They cannot bury the truth." The words hung heavy in the room. Shanghai. Another battlefield. Another war. David exhaled slowly. He had come here to escape blood and secrets, to live as a ghost among clean hallways and unremarkable days. But the truth had found him again. Perhaps it had never left. "I will go," he said at last. The chairwoman's hand trembled as it touched his arm. "Then I will not let you go alone." Her father's cane struck the floor with sharp finality. "No, she stays. If they know you are gone together, they will destroy everything she has left here. You must carry this weight alone." David met the old man's gaze. In it he saw not command, but fear. A father who had nearly lost his daughter once already. He nodded once. "Then I will carry it." That night, David stood at the hospital roof, the city sprawling beneath him. Sirens flared in the distance. Chants still rose from the streets, but up here it was quiet. The air tasted of storm. He thought of the boy whose heart he had restarted, the woman whose life he had saved, the soldiers whose faces haunted his sleep. And he knew he was no longer just an orderly, no longer just a forgotten surgeon. He was a man walking into the heart of fire, because silence had cost too much already. Far below, a single flare lit the sky from the crowd, red against the night. The city was ready to burn. And in that glow, David Carter made his vow. He would cross oceans, face enemies in the shadows, and tear open the truth no matter the price. For the war had outgrown these hospital walls. And the next chapter would be written in another land. The hospital lights burned through the night, but David Carter knew his time within those walls was ending. The board had already made their move. The smear campaign, the masked intruders, the crowds tearing each other apart outside. The next strike would come from farther away. He sat in his small apartment packing what little he owned. A few books, a weathered coat, instruments he had carried from battlefield to battlefield. Each item felt like a fragment of a man he had once been, scattered and half forgotten. Now he gathered them, piece by piece, as if preparing to step back into the fire. A knock on the door. He froze, hand tightening around the worn leather bag. When he opened it, she stood there. The chairwoman. Still weak from her injuries, but fierce, determined. "You can't go alone," she said. "I must," he answered. Her eyes searched his face. "Then at least let me protect you." She stepped inside, laying a small box on the table. Inside, a satellite phone encrypted, a device her company used only for its most delicate operations. "With this, I can reach you wherever you are. Whatever happens, you won't vanish into silence." He closed the box slowly. "If they trace this, they'll know." "They already know," she said. "The only difference is whether you live to tell the story." Her presence filled the room with a quiet strength. She had nearly died on his table. Now she stood as the one shielding him. Moments later, her father entered, leaning heavily on his cane. His eyes carried storms. "You leave at dawn. There are men waiting to escort you to the airport. They owe me favors, old debts. They'll see you onto the plane. After that, you're on your own." David met his gaze. "And if I don't return?" "Then the truth dies," the old man said flatly. "And with it, everything we've fought to preserve." The chairwoman flinched at her father's bluntness, but David only nodded. He understood. Truth had never been free. Dawn broke with restless skies. Clouds hung low, the city tense with unspoken violence. Protesters filled the streets again, their chants echoing like drums of war. David slipped through the back corridors of the hospital, escorted by two silent men in dark coats. Each turn felt heavier, each step closer to exile. In the underground parking lot, the car waited. But as he approached, a sudden scream rang out. From the shadows, figures surged forward, men in masks, steel glinting in their hands. The guards fought them off, chaos erupting in echoes of fists and metal. David was shoved into the back seat, the car lurching forward as tires squealed against concrete. Behind them, shouts faded into the roar of the city. The chairwoman's voice crackled through the encrypted phone he clutched. "David, are you safe?" He steadied his breath. "Safe for now. But they know. They'll chase me until I reach the other side." "Then run faster than their lies," she whispered. The car cut through the city, streets flashing past in streaks of neon and fire. They reached the airport just as night surrendered to pale light. David stepped out, clutching his bag, his heart a steady drum. The terminal was crowded, faces blurred by exhaustion and fear. Yet among them he felt the weight of eyes. Too many watching, too many waiting. Still he walked forward, gate by gate, step by step. Each stride was a vow he would not vanish. At the boarding checkpoint, a guard stopped him. Fingers lingered too long on his passport. A pause that stretched like wire, then a nod, and the gate opened. On the tarmac, the plane waited, silver against the storm. As he climbed the steps, he glanced back. The city skyline loomed, restless and burning. He thought of the chairwoman, of her father, of the boy whose life he had saved. And he thought of the files waiting across the ocean, buried in vaults that men killed to protect. When he stepped into the cabin, the door closed behind him with a hiss that felt like destiny itself. He settled into the narrow seat, the hum of engines rising. The plane lifted, breaking through the clouds. Below, the city shrank into shadow. Ahead, the horizon opened, wide and uncertain. David Carter closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in readiness. The war had followed him across continents before. Now he was carrying it into the heart of the storm, and somewhere in Shanghai, the truth waited to be unearthed. The first chapter ends here. David Carter is on his way to Shanghai, where the real storm waits. But this journey has only just begun. Subscribe now and be ready. Episode 2 arrives tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't miss it. The fight for truth is only getting started.